This is really about being free to create what you want your life to look like. We each are our own hero. And how do we take the challenges that come our way and see those as the birth process of us becoming heroic? Can you meet that judgment that ultimately will surface with neutrality?
This is the Wall Street Coach Podcast with Kim Ann Curtin.
Well, welcome back to the Wall Street Coach Podcast with your host, Kim Ann Curtin and Lucas Peterson. Hi, Lucas.
Hey, Kim. How are you?
I'm doing good. A little frazzled today, but all is well. All is well.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm doing well. Like I was saying just before this, the markets are going up and I'm pretty long right now. And so it feels fine.
Okay. Good. That's a good thing. I'm glad. Today we're gonna do one around learning, but this is definitely one that I know the traders that watch us are going to appreciate today. And but I want for those who are non-traders to just consider that this is applicable for everything you need to develop in yourself or you want to learn, including just becoming more kind of self-aware. So today we're going to just talk about the 4 stages of competency, and I'm just going to give you a little bit around how you can recognize them and what they each look like. This was something I actually only learned probably in the last couple of years. I'm not sure when I first heard about it. How about you, Lucas? Do you feel like you've known about this for a long time?
I feel like I had heard about it back in college, maybe like in a philosophy class or something, or a psychology class. I can't remember, but it wasn't like we dove deep into it, but it was just around like, these are the ways that you learn. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. Just tell me what I need to know at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, just give me a degree and I'll be out of here. But
yep.
I wish I'd pay more attention.
But that's awesome. No, I mean, in a way, you gotta love that hunger for knowledge and that just let me dive into the pool and start to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I kind of could relate to that enthusiasm. Yeah. I think the first time I don't think they called it the 4 stages of competency at Landmark Education, but I remember this is 12, 13 years ago, they put up on a whiteboard, that which we know and that which we don't know. And then the majority of the circle was that which we don't know that we don't know. And that was exactly. The revelation of, wow, that is such a bigger part of the circle than the other 2. So that was kind of their interpretation on this concept of 4 stages of competence. But I think, for anybody who's trying to develop themselves in any manner, shape, or form, understanding these stages, perhaps similar to the hero's journey map, it helps you know where you are. It helps you to prepare for what's next. And it just gives you, again, self-awareness and a sense of place in the midst of what your learning curve is. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence, and just double check me that they say them all right, because it can get a little confusing sometimes. Okay.
I know, right? They all sound the same.
I'm like, please make sure I'm saying it right to our audience. I mean, oh God, I screwed it up. We have to re-record. So unconscious incompetence is similar to what I just spoke of in that circle that I learned in Landmark, what you don't know that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's sort of, once you have the awareness that you don't know what you don't know, that is probably one of the, safer is a tricky word, but safer places to be, because if somebody put me in the cockpit of an airplane, I certainly would know I don't know what I don't know really quickly. And I wouldn't want to fool myself that I do know how to fly that plane, so to speak. However, that is the beginning stage for everybody and I think even when I first looked at the trading monitor, my stocks to trade, when I went into the pro room and I looked at all the moving parts, I can tell you, I felt like somebody had thrown me into the cockpit of a plane, because I was like, oh my God, look at all this that I'm going to have to learn. I don't know any of it. I am so freaked out. Yeah. So there is a little bit of fear and freak out in that initial stage of seeing something in that incompetence stage, but it's where all of the journey begins. The second stage is, I just wrote them down to remind myself, is conscious incompetence. And that is basically that knowing wow, now I guess really conscious incompetence is that place where wow, I don't know all this stuff that I do need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows you to begin to soak up the knowledge that you need to have. And just on the personal development side, I would say that is the moment, I tell a lot of people about the gremlins or inner saboteurs or the inner critics that are within themselves. When people start to retaming your gremlin, when people start to pay attention to that is also a moment of like, wow, conscious incompetence. I didn't even realize I was listening to this voice in my head that was making things awful for me. And that moment is sort of a shift. There's a great shift when somebody finds out, oh, wow, I might have an inner critic that is not helping me. The third stage is conscious competence, where you realize, okay, even in a trade, for example, I am potentially taking these actions because I studied and learned this specific pattern. And that's me trying to work in this place of I now know some information and I'm going to try to utilize that. And in a lot of ways, that could be the most dangerous of all these stages, because you have some knowledge and it can be a default setting for people to think I've got it all figured out now. You can have a tendency, one can certainly become overly confident and overly sure of themselves in the conscious competence stage. The stage that you ultimately want to get to is the fourth stage, which is unconscious competence. And I think one of the best metaphors for that is how you can drive from your house to the store and not even remember how you got there.
Yeah.
You don't even remember like paying attention to the drive because you're probably talking on the phone or listening to the radio or thinking about tomorrow. And yet somehow your whole body knew how to drive the car, how to handle somebody who cut you off, how to get into the parking lot. You didn't have to think specifically consciously through all of the millions of steps that it takes to get you there. And that is ultimately what you want to get to as a trader. But it does take practice. It does take years and years of knowing. But these four stages, and remember too that these four stages, it doesn't necessarily mean if you go through all four, you're done. You probably will have to go back and revisit, because hopefully, especially as a trader, like for example, now you're talking about, I know on the Steady Trade podcast, we were talking this morning, Stephen Johnson, who's notoriously been a short trader, is now really trying to learn long because the market has changed. So as a trader, you do need to always be coming from a place of constantly learning that which you don't know. Not in the beginning, of course, but he's been at it for a number of years now. So now he's like, okay, I have to start to master another kind of style and pattern. So yeah,
that's basically it, right? Like it's consciousness is awareness, and then competence is knowledge. So it's just like having an awareness of the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you don't have. I mean, I think like every philosopher has at one point said something along those lines. I feel like Socrates has that line, something around knowing what you don't know is true knowledge, something like that. But
yeah, for sure.
Paraphrase. I should have looked it up. But
I think that is pretty close to what he said. So he probably, had a fancier kind of word at the end and but the gist of it, you've gotten across, and that's what matters. Yeah. So I think, when we were talking beforehand about what does that conscious competence, like what happens there, especially for a trader, I would say we spoke about the learning to read the charts, identifying patterns, and also I would argue developing that emotional awareness.
100%. Yeah.
Really begin to realize that your state of mind, your state of mood is going to impact your ability to be really present during your trading. And I think one of the things, we both have talked about offline is that these patterns are not encouraged. People have not been taught by our culture, society, by school, to pay attention to all of that. And that is then I think for some people becomes trivial. Like they think, oh, well, that's not as important as me studying.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it actually is probably even more important. I think it's Van Tharp, a notorious, day trading coach, who says that 60% is the psychological of trading. I think he says it's 30% knowledge and 10%. Can't remember what the 10% is right now, but 60 is definitely the psychological side and the emotional side. So just being aware of the fact that you are an emotional being, and just being aware that you are going to have this, you have to be emotionally aware of yourself, because that can sabotage you and get in your way. If you don't even know that going in, then you potentially are going to be like, what is it? The leash around the dog. It's like you're going to be kind of pulled every which way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's funny when people think that trading or the markets in general don't run off of emotion, but then we see, people chase price. Like that's why that's why price goes up, because people chase it. So and true. People will stand in line if there's a line for a bar, and people if you go to a restaurant and it's busy, you're like, ooh, I want to go there. That is the emotion of our minds and our bodies. Like I truly don't understand when people are like, trading is not emotional. And it's like, I feel the complete opposite. It's 100% emotional. You just have to be aware that it is. And I think that's where a lot of society in general, outside of trading, is completely unconscious of their incompetence around emotional intelligence. And that probably transfers over, into trading as well. And a lot of people aren't even aware of why they're chasing a price.
Right, exactly.
Have an exit plan.
and to not be aware that you're chasing price, like think about the damage. Yeah. That can be done in the midst of you not even knowing that that's what's driving you. Mm-hmm. It's like an invisible driver inside of you, controlling your hands on your keyboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how well is that going to go? Yeah. So, I think that concept of conscious incompetence sounds maybe intimidating or unpleasant, or like nobody wants to be there, but that's the place where you have hope in a lot of ways, because you can see that you don't know it all, and that allows you to potentially be open-minded and or continue towards direction of learning. Yeah. And I know one of the things we talked about was like, how do you make sure you're always, in fact, Stephen talked about a book I'd never heard of before. The title eludes me. We'll put it in the liner notes because I can't recall it. But it just talked about getting a little bit better and getting a little bit more educated every day, and to never think you've accomplished all that you need to accomplish. Yeah. And it's not so much around accomplishment that I would say I would subscribe to, but that sense of being able to improve yourself and improve in small incremental steps, that I do subscribe to. And I think just even as a coach, 14 years is a long time, but all along, in fact, one of my accountants along the way, he used to say to me, wow, you do a lot of self-development work on yourself, Kim. Like there were so many, he's like, I've never seen anybody spend this much money on that. And I'm like, because I constantly want to get to the next level so that I can be able to hold that space for my clients. And at the end of the day, as a trader, there is no mastery of the markets. Yeah. And that is what you need to remember. So in a way, conscious incompetence also makes me think of the phrase, when you think you have the monopoly on truth, tolerance is hardly possible, right? Because you think you've figured it all out. So that is a great quote for us to avoid hubris in our personal day-to-day life. And God knows we need some of that for politics right now, where everybody has a tendency to think they have the monopoly on truth. And we shared this conversation too, Lucas and I had a conversation with somebody this morning who I don't see eye to eye with on a lot of topics, but I could appreciate some of his perspective today in a new way because, and or a perspective that I don't share because the way he explained it. And because I wasn't coming from a place, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying I'm coming from this place of trying to always be open-minded. So I was able to hear where he was coming from in his thought process. And that helped me understand that perspective. Doesn't mean I changed my mind, but it helped me understand. And that's what I want you guys to do and think about. How can you become more into a state of conscious incompetence, at least and this is it. This is something too, I just want to say, I'm sorry, I'm speaking so long, Lucas, but
That's okay.
the concept is the reason I think people have a hard time not being with the fact that they can't possibly have the monopoly of truth, and or the reason people can't admit to themselves that they are consciously incompetent is because people have been shamed and made to feel bad and be ashamed of being wrong. Like, it's like we're not allowed to just not know anymore. Yeah. It's like we demonize ourselves and our culture demonizes us and makes us feel bad and shitty for not knowing.
Yeah. And this can transcend into trading very easily. Like, we are taught to, in school, we're like indoctrinated with, in school, your IQ is what matters. And so like, you need to know these things and you need to know these things and you need to be right. There's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way to do things. There's this, you learn it, you are able to repeat it, you know, and you build. And if you go into trading with that mindset, like, and you, watch something that opens, it pulls back a little bit, it starts to climb back, and you are like, this is going to run, and you jump in and you're going long, and it doesn't, if it like just peters out at the open, and falls back, and then you're like, I know it, and you stay in it, and you don't have a stop, you're screwing yourself, and you're just going to get annihilated if you like size up in those positions. So
totally,
I think
it's the grade. It's the grade mentality, giving people a grade, like, oh, I'm not that good. Yeah. And that situation you just explained, like, you're going to be experiencing the triggers of what would have happened in a classroom setting, or with all that would have come with a report card with your parents in that moment of your trade.
Yeah. There's this funny quote by Jason Shapiro. He was in the Market Wizards book, and he said something along the lines of like you don't need to be right in a trade. You'll never be right, but you will get like within the realm of right. And he was like, if you want to be right, go be a lawyer. I found that very funny. It was like,
awesome.
Yeah, go get like a normal job.
That's right. That's right. And yet normal, like I would say there is no normal jobs today. I think the heart of the matter is, even in the workplace, the corporate work setting, that concept isn't working. Like, I think that's part of what we're coming out of, is this, like, we have to be right. There is a black and white, and look, living in the gray is definitely more difficult. It definitely asks more of us cognitively and emotionally and spiritually, but that is a place that I think, maybe still lawyers are operating under that kind of place of having to be right. But I agree. That's a great quote. And that is, maybe that's the number one question traders need to ask themselves before they even start. We both know everybody's plowed into day trading. So the question becomes, are you a person who feels you have to be right? And if you are, and if that's your default setting, how much could day trading possibly not be for you? Yeah. It may not be for you, because you're never going to be 100% right here. And if you feel like crap every time you're not, if you can't get along with people that don't have an opinion similar to you, that's telling you right there, you're probably going to have a cost, a monetary cost in trading. Yeah.
This is also, I sent you this morning, but this a person on Twitter who posts a lot of really cool threads. His name is Sahil Bloom. He posted a thing about the Circle of Competence. And
cool.
It's around, he posted like some screenshots. He always posts like these long threads that are pretty informative. And one of them was around Warren Buffett and what, like, Warren Buffett's approach to investing. And I just want to read this quote. It's,
please do.
he says, what an investor needs is the ability to correctly evaluate selected businesses. Note that word selected. You don't have to be an expert on every company or even money. You only have to be able to evaluate companies within your circle of competence. The size of that circle is not very important. Knowing its boundaries, however, is vital. And so this is kind of that idea of like knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know.
Exactly.
And he was also like Buffett has been criticized, I guess, a lot in the past about passing on things like Google and Amazon early on. Yep. And he was like, I just didn't know it. Like I know real estate, and that's
correct.
And so, and those didn't present themselves as real estate immediately. And he wasn't a firm believer because he didn't have the competence and the knowledge in what that was going to look like.
Exactly. And for him, and who would look at him, and that cracks me up when people dismiss him for the things he didn't take. But it's like, what are you thinking? Like, who cares what he didn't take? What he did take worked for him, or he wouldn't be who he is. And it's like, but that mindset, if you take that mindset into your own trading, you're going to be self-sabotaging. Because before Google, and at the same time as Google, there was a whole bunch of probably other, maybe not a whole bunch because Google is pretty unique, but I'm sure there were other opportunities that he could have gone into that wouldn't have become a Google. Yeah. And he could have lost so much more in because he didn't understand it. Yeah. And so it's that sense of, false bravado that it's so easy. Oh, I'm going to criticize Warren Buffett because he didn't invest in Google. Like, that just doesn't even make sense to me.
That's what he says along the line somewhere is like, but they don't calculate in all the things he passed on that completely failed, right? Correct. It's always easy. Revisionist history is the easiest thing to do.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And the concept of this, of being comfortable with your circle, as this gentleman is talking about, like it's not important, he said, how big that circle is. That's what I just heard you say. Yeah. That to me is the most important quote. And I think that also gets into a bit of a pissing contest where it's like, well, I'm an expert in all of these things. And this was out there somewhere on social media too. I don't know if it was Gary Vaynerchuk or somebody else, but it was somebody talking about like how everybody is positioning themselves now as an expert, kind of in everything. Yeah. And it's like, how could we possibly know everything? None of us can. And you know what it was? It was Celeste Headley, who we're going to definitely have on our podcast soon. I'm so excited. She's the author of the book, Do Nothing. So read it if you want to get prepared for that podcast, people. But she was talking on the Goop podcast about this concept that we've been put in a place culturally where everybody is supposed to be well versed in every department and every topic. Yeah. And people talk as if they could be. And it's not the same as having opinions. Like, of course you have a right to have an opinion on every topic, including the ones you know nothing about. But don't posture as though you are an expert in this particular field. If you aren't, if you've read one article or you've read one book, that doesn't make you an expert. Yeah.
That's so Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's like, one of his partners, he said, let me just get the quote here. I was looking it up earlier. Oh, he said, so you can become a consistent winner by trying to be consistently not stupid and instead of trying to be very intelligent.
That's so brilliant. I really like that.
I think that's what we're saying, right? Like,
that's what we're saying.
Just don't be stupid. Like you don't need to be the smartest person in the room.
That's right.
But also like, don't just run around being the stupidest person in the room.
Exactly. Just be conscious. Just be conscious and be self-aware. That is the kicker. And Charlie Munger, I'm not saying I would love to hang out with Warren Buffett, but I think Charlie Munger, every quote I've ever read of his is just like, talk about the dry sense of humor. God, that man
seems like a lot of fun.
He just seems like a lot of fun. He just says, like, Warren Buffett seems very polite, but Munger, I don't think he probably is as polite. He would just like rip you a new one without thinking twice.
Probably. He's a funny guy.
Which, well, you know, with his sarcasm, like he would just kill you with his intellect and his barbs, you know, like that's the feeling I got from him. You know, I have to probably bring this one of these days on the podcast. But when I was writing my book, Transforming Wall Street, I wrote to Warren Buffett to try to interview him. And he wrote me back twice. You know, a handwritten note on my letter, you know, turning down the interview because he was too busy, and he gets interview requests all the time, but he liked the sound of my book, and he'd like this nice handwritten note from Warren Buffett on my, he wrote right on my letter and then sent it back to me. So I have those two. And then I guess I wrote him I sent him a copy of my book, and he wrote me back again, thanking me for it. So just, you know, they don't make people like that anymore. Yeah.
There's a have you watched the documentary? The Warren Buffett documentary? It's on.
Is it an old one?
No, I think it came out like a year or two ago. It's on, I want to say HBO.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting.
All about him.
Yeah.
I'll watch that.
He's an interesting guy.
He's an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy. Very fascinating story.
He eats McDonald's every morning or gets a coffee there, something like that. Yeah.
That's right. I've heard that too.
But he just owns most of it.
Yeah, exactly.
He's keeping himself in business.
I just heard that he has his change. Like he pays like with the specific, like let's say it's $5.36. He always pays $5.36.
Exactly. Specific to the cent. Yeah. He knows exactly what it is. And that's like what he brings with him for the day is like the money that he makes. It's interesting.
It's pretty fascinating and I think he's probably, you know, a great example of that sense of honoring his conscious incompetence. Like he's really great at seeing like, that's not my wheelhouse. I'm not going there.
100%.
Not going there. And he doesn't feel insecure around it. And that's part of why I feel he's a great example too of like his lifestyle, in the sense that he's living in the same house he's lived in for years. Like he never needed to show off his wealth. He really gets that it's an inside job. You know, it's not like proving it to the neighbors or. Yeah.
That reminds me of another quote I heard one time. I don't remember who said it or where it's from, but it was money talks, but wealth whispers. Have you ever heard that?
Never heard that. That's awesome. Yeah. I like that. It's so true.
And it's true. Like, I mean, most of the people I know that are very wealthy are, you know, the quietest, kindest people that you would never assume. Like they don't drive Lamborghinis or, you know.
They do not. They do not. I remember visiting, you know, I grew up I was born in Brooklyn, and then a good chunk of my life was spent on St. James, which is on the North Shore of Long Island. And very, very wealthy estates, they call it the Gold Coast, are on that North Shore. You know, think Jay Gatsby kind of style, you know, compounds. And one of our neighbors growing up, her family had one of these estates. And I do remember going there and, you know, seeing this was either her brother or her uncle had like, you know, I mean, it was just incredible amount of land and horses and house and holy mackerel. But I remember the brother, you know, I was a young girl, so I was, you know, fascinated and curious and soaking it all up. But the brother, I remember, had on a sweater, and the sweater had holes in the elbows. And I remember thinking, like, you would think if you got this wealthy, you would not have a sweater. But like, that wasn't like part of his headspace, you know? And I think it just made me have to take a second look at like, how do the wealthy live? How do those who have, it's certainly, and that house and that property, you know, was probably in their family for generations. But, you know, nobody was moving. Nobody was like having the shiny objects, if you will. Yeah. But it was pretty fascinating for me to see, like, wow, a sweater with holes. And like, I would have probably been mortified as a young girl wearing that kind of sweater in school. And yet, you know, maybe he would not have been, you know, which is.
Yeah. It's just a different mindset, right?
Different mindset, totally different mindset. Yeah. And the other thing you had sent me was about the Stanford write-up, where it talked about. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that article, because that was a really great read.
Oh, I don't have it in front of me right now. Do you have it?
Okay, no worries. I do. No problem. Well, it was talking about just having multiple teachers and gurus along the way on the journey. And you and I were talking specifically to the trading, you know, mindset. get is make sure that you have people who have been potentially on that road before, so that if there are potholes up ahead, they are going to be able to help you prepare for the inevitable pothole. And I think that's a big part of, the challenge of developing yourself is you can't do it in a vacuum. You need to have other people who have walked that road before on the journey with you. Maybe they're not your best friend, but is there somebody calling you forward who's a little bit ahead of the game? Yeah. And even as a coach, when I was starting out, the coach that I hired, she was, Kate Roski, shout out to you, Kate. She was incredibly encouraging me, encouraging to me on the journey to like push me beyond what was comfortable. And that I do think every trader needs.
Yeah. I love the graphic. I just pulled it up on that, the Stanford site, where it says they have a graphic and it goes literacy, then fluency, then mastery. Right. And that's kind of, it's the building blocks. And I think it is, you do need somebody ahead of you to teach you. Like, that's why we go to school. That's why we do anything. You seek out like the knowledge of a guru or a teacher so that, or else you can't learn, or you learn the wrong way. I think that's one thing that, can be dangerous in the transition between conscious incompetence and conscious competence is like, if you start learning the wrong thing, right? I equate it to thinking about like building a building. You need like a very flat foundation, a really secure flat foundation. Because if you get things off by, a quarter of a degree at the base, if it's a 100-story building, it's going to be off by, 50 feet. So, and that'll send you down.
Yep, for sure. For sure. And I think, that is probably too something that is very important, especially to traders starting out, is that you really vet the person you're going to be learning from. Yes. That you really vet the teacher or teachers. A lot of new traders have a tendency to follow people on, FinTwit, on Twitter, and listen to people who are not in a position to be advising them. Yeah. And this is only, this only lasts so long because you get burned quick enough. You go, shit, I can't listen to these people.
Figure out to do the opposite of them.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a few people I follow just because I think that they just use Twitter as a pump and then they short into it. And so
I'm sure.
I honestly, I don't know, but that's what it looks like most of the time. Where it's just like everything they do is the opposite.
Wow.
Or they're just really bad.
Right. Or they're really bad. But boy, to be that consistently bad and keep pumping it out, that seems to me like a little shady. Yeah. But I love that you follow them. And I think that's really wise because in a sense, it's allowing you to see whatever that machinery is in the background, that JJ VWAP trader that we interviewed on the Steady Trade, which is an amazing episode. Little sidebar here, guys. If you haven't watched, do you know what that episode number is? Help me out. What was that episode number? For the JJ interviewed.
It was 116? No, because you guys just did 161, I think.
Oh, 161, right. So see if you can find the number. And that interview, I met JJ through my friend Ray, Confessions of a Market Maker, Ray. And Ray actually invited me to his podcast, months and months ago. And after that podcast, JJ and I started to talk, and then I invited him. Actually, Ray, we first had on Steady Trade as a guest. Then he had me on his podcast. It's a little incestuous, obviously. Podcast guest.
All of the finance world is. It's
so small.
Especially like the trading world.
People are so surprised how small the finance world is, but it really is small. It's such a small tribe of people. And then JJ came on and blew Tim Bowen and Stephen Johnson's minds away. Yeah. I mean, he blew my mind away too, but their depth and breadth of knowledge for the past, 13 years, for Tim anyway, 14 years trading, he was just like, holy crap, all these things that I thought were happening, to hear that they really are happening intentionally is a lot to take in. He was I have not seen Tim kind of like go like that before as he does in that interview. Yeah, but that kind of a person, like JJ is a teacher, Tim Bowen is a teacher, right? Even Stephen Johnson now, with all the challenges he's been up against, and he just stays with it. These are and also Stephen Johnson, a shout out to him for his vulnerability. Like Stephen has been willing to show people the losses and being very honest around how painfully
for like years, right? Like
for years.
Yeah.
Like he has never let his
tough.
ego get in the way of what he struggled with. And these are the teachers you guys want to look for. You know, you want to look for the people that really care. And a shout out also to True Trader, because Benito and Adriano over there too, they really give a damn about you guys. I know Dan is there he's one of their experts in there too. But you got to find the people who have a lot of testimonials, who have been talking their praises, singing their praises for a long time. Be selective, people. Be selective in who you have as your guru teacher, but get one. For God's sakes, get one.
Get one, then get another. And
then get another. Exactly.
Learn as much as you can from as many people as you can. The episode that JJ was on is 179. You guys have done it. It was 181. I was mistaken.
Wow, 179. Okay, so we have been putting them out there, those Steady Trade podcasts like crazy.
We're on episode 12.
Why? What's episode 12? What's episode 12?
No, that's us right now.
Oh, right, that's us. That's episode 12. Right? I forgot. Right, so, but it's okay. Before we know it, Lucas will be at 180 episodes.
A couple years
up ahead. And the other thing I wanted to speak to was this amazing book that I read years ago called SQ21, and it's about spiritual intelligence. It's written by Cindy Wigglesworth, and she is one of the people featured in my book, talking about how spiritual intelligence, so she says, first it was IQ, then it was EQ, emotional intelligence, but that we're moving into SQ now. And spiritual intelligence, people hear that and they think, oh, is this religion? No, it's not religion. It's about the sense of being able to be connected to not just what's happening in front of you and potentially with the other person, but like in the sense of the whole atmosphere of a situation. And she gives this great description of spiritual intelligence that I wish I had handy, but I don't. So I'm going to just do the Cliff Note version of it, but which it basically is to be able to meet and be with whatever's happening, good or bad, horrific or not, from a place of neutrality. And that's what she feels is high spiritual intelligence. So, ultimately her work is where you would take an assessment to see what is your spiritual intelligence IQ? Where do you stand with your ability to stay neutral? And I think more than anything, that's what traders need to work on. How do they do that? And look, I hope you will follow me, and I hope you will listen to what I have to say, because that is a journey I have had personally. My quest for myself personally for many, many years, probably since I'm a little girl, is, wow, how can I learn the tools to handle no matter what life throws at me? That being said, as much as I want you guys to hopefully pay attention to what I have to say, there are so many teachers out there in addition to me who are advocates of consciousness, who are advocates of self-awareness. You got to listen to them too, because every single one of us are going to have a different perspective and opinion. And I'm just going to throw a couple of names out there now so people have a reference. Eckhart Tolle, you just can't beat him. I know he's not for everybody's cup of tea because he can be very esoteric, but gosh, reading his book, The Power of Now or Whole New Earth, I mean, it's just game changing. And the other one that I like a lot, who I think is a little, he can be esoteric too, but in a different way than Tolle, is Adyashanti. He has a book called Falling into Grace and a whole bunch of talks online as well. And the other one I'm going to speak to is Byron Katie. She's the woman who wrote that book that I talk about often called Loving What Is. These are three of my teachers that profoundly have changed my life. The other one I'm going to mention, and he is out there, is this guy, Jed McKenna, and he has a trilogy called Spiritual Enlightenment, the damnedest thing. There's two others that come with that set. I'll be honest, if you really want to dive deep in like just how asleep you might be, he is the guy for you. And he's not all esoteric. He's like kind of, drive up, put explosive dynamite in your sense of who you are and press the button of explosion. I had a bit of a nervous breakdown after I read his trilogy, to be honest, Lucas. So.
Okay, so we're putting a warning label on that one.
Proceed with caution.
Maybe ease your way into that one.
Maybe ease your way in. Don't read all 3 books at once like I did. And I remember calling my coach at the time, and I was just like, I think I'm cracking up. He was like, I think you are cracking up. He's like, you had to go in and put the explosives and blow the house up, Kim. You couldn't have just done a renovation or two. I was like,
but that's you were falling into the conscious incompetence at that point, right? Like you suddenly became aware of what you didn't know, or it was just, and that's so
it was overwhelming.
But that's
unmooring.
Yeah, and it's a great place to be for a bit. You don't want to get stuck there, right? Like and I think.
But it's scary to be in that place, and it's probably good to just talk about that, because during that, I think it took about 6 weeks or 8 weeks for me to come back to center, emotionally. Like it was, I felt as though somebody had just kind of like, that is it Socrates? I don't know who's the is it Plato? Maybe Plato's cave. Who's the one with the cave?
Plato.
Plato. So that we think we're in the movie, but that we find out later it's just the images up against the cave wall, right? Yeah. So it was like that kind of a moment for me where I just had that awareness of like, holy crap, I have been looking at something that I thought was a movie that isn't actually, that I thought was real, and it actually was a movie. And I was fortunate to have the right kind of people around me. I was fortunate enough to have a coach around me who could hold space for that. Like there was no fixing it. There was no like quickly rebuilding the house. It was like, you got to sit with the fact that everything is in pieces on the floor now. And that's not going to be fun. It's not going to be fun for a while.
No. Yeah.
But it facilitates the new house being built.
Exactly. It facilitates growth. It puts you into a place of the ability to have conscious competence. It is
for
a
sure
good thing. And then now look at you, unconscious competence.
I hope some. I don't know.
Maybe not.
All. I think there's some places. I think there's some places that, look, I still am doing this work on myself. It's not like I fully have arrived. I think once we fully arrive and we've learned all we have to learn,
then we're out. Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I was mostly joking, but one thing that I think to keep in mind about like the conscious competence model is that you might be forever just in conscious competence, and that's okay. Like with trading, especially with trading, if you get to a place where it's great if you have like a setup and a model that is working perfectly, but if you want to trade like multiple setups, you're probably going to be in a state of conscious competence for a long time, because it's just like, for sure, you have to check off all the boxes. If not like physically on a piece of paper or something, like mentally you're checking them off. And so, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. And if you are seeking unconscious competence in the market, I think you potentially set yourself up for disappointment and a sense of never accomplishing anything. Yeah. I mean, like the only people with unconscious competence, I feel like, are like JJ when he worked as a market maker, right? Like when you know exactly what's going to happen. If you don't, the rest of us are just reacting. Like I think about this a lot, like in trading in general, we're just riding a wave. Like we're not in control of it. If you think you're in control of it, you're in for a disaster. You just need to recognize what waves look like and how far you can take them. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely true. And I think that riding the wave, for any good surfer, the surfers are able to not expect a certain experience from the wave. They're able to surrender, which takes a huge amount of vulnerability, a willingness to be vulnerable, to surrender how this may go down, because that wave could at any second change. Yeah. You hit a weird current or something, or you hit a halt in the market, and then all of a sudden what was running up 20% is now down 10.
And you're hitting a coral reef.
Yeah. They have a listing and then you get screwed and there.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
okay.
but like, how do you be with that and say, okay, that is part of the experience. There's nothing wrong. It's nothing I did necessarily wrong. Like maybe you did something wrong or maybe you didn't. And it's just the nature of the way that day is going to go.
Yeah.
So if you don't get comfortable with that discomfort, that's why I feel this journey of self-awareness and self-development, and certainly this map of, the 4 stages of competency, and even the hero's journey, which we've talked about many times, having that sense of map of what to expect potentially mitigates the pain and discomfort. But this is why I'm such an advocate for everybody getting comfortable with the discomfort, learning how to ride the hard to be with feelings so that you can ultimately transcend them. And, I heard this distinction. I don't know if do you know Sadhguru? He's a Indian guru who's out and about. He's got courses. He's the guy that's behind the inner engineering that Gabor Mate advocates, the kind of meditation practice or yoga practice. So Sadhguru has this, he has such a great distinction where he talks about, people come to him and say, I want to control my mind. I want to stop it from like always thinking, where's the switch? Where's the switch to shut it off? And he says, you don't want to control your mind. You want to liberate your mind.
Yeah. Because
control is you're part of the same game.
Yep.
So the key is, how do you liberate your mind from being hooked? And that, I would say to everybody who's a trader or anybody who wants to learn anything they have never perhaps dived into before, you want to develop a new skill set, you want to stay on the road to consciousness and self-awareness and development, you're going to need to find a way to liberate yourself from the shame or the making yourself wrong or from the judgment that's always kind of our default setting as human beings.
Yeah, this might go back to, this made me think of it, but back to what you were originally saying around like the taming your gremlin. And I think that might be the starting point that we should all be at to learn anything is finding the conscious competence of our own ego, right? And like around taming it and understanding how it exists in this world and so that we can liberate that process to learn. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Felt like a word salad, but I don't know.
It did. It did make sense. I think the concept is you're trying to introduce, like what we're doing is we're trying to talk outside of the ego, and that's probably why it feels like a word salad, because it's sort of hard to wrap your hands around this, but it's ultimately in service to us becoming that observer of ourselves as opposed to just operating as though we are ourselves. Mm-hmm. And once you start to observe yourself, that is where everything opens up. That is where everything opens up. But to do that, and rather to be able to continuously do that, you're going to need to be able to really embrace the non-judgment, because you can't, if you observe yourself with judgment, ultimately that you're going to kind of pull back from that because you're going to feel judged all the time.
Yeah. And
because you're going to see your humanity.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be the worst thing? See your own humanity.
Well, it is not always pretty. And so for sure it is, but it's like, welcome to being human. Like none of us are pretty. Like we are all human. We're all have fail. We're going to all have fail. We're all going to make mistakes. And it's like, can we embrace that side of ourselves as well?
Yeah.
There's a beautiful quote. I probably won't be able to find it in time that I have shared with a lot of clients in my life. And it's actually from a play. Let's just see here. I think it's Arthur Miller, actually, Embrace. It's a quote from, okay, here it is. All right, I'm going to read this to everybody because it's one of my most favorite quotes. I think it's a mistake to ever look for hope outside of oneself. One day the house smells of fresh bread, the next of smoke and blood. One day you faint because the gardener cuts his finger off. Within a week, you're climbing over corpses of children bombed in a subway. What hope can there be if that is so? I tried to die near the end of the war. The same dream returned each night until I dared not to go to sleep and grew quite ill. I dreamed I had a child, and even in the dream, I saw it was my life, and it was an idiot, and I ran away. But it always crept onto my lap again, clutched at my clothes, until I thought if I could kiss it, whatever it was, my own, perhaps I could sleep. And I bent to its broken face, and it was horrible, but I kissed it. I think one must finally take one's life in one's arms. It's deep. It's a deep poem or quote. It's from the play After the Fall. Okay. But the heart of that is like, how do we find a way to look at that part of ourselves that isn't perfect and embrace it and not reject it, or that part of ourselves that is still incompetent, or that part of ourselves that isn't fully conscious, and find a way to embrace it and be with it. Yeah. And that, to me, like once he's being tormented in that quote because he can't embrace that part of himself that he keeps rejecting. Yeah. And, and even for traders, like the notorious thing I hear among all new traders, it's like they're just so incredibly hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's how long can you endure that self-flagellation with the whip? Like, how long are you going to be able to, how can you give all of your cognitive energy over to what it is you have to learn that's so brand new to you when there's a part of you constantly beating yourself? I think back to the Da Vinci Code. There was a character, did you read that book? There was a character who had this thing attached to his leg as an old kind of practice of some stream of monks that did this, where it was constantly cutting his skin to keep him humble, so to speak. And that's what I see so many people do in general in their life, never mind new traders who are trying to learn. It's like, if you're going to keep beating the shit out of yourself, how far could you go? You can't run a marathon if you keep yourself from water or nourishment or keep your feet in good condition. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also a lot of, I think it takes a lot of bravery and a lot of vulnerability to say, like, I don't know this, and to even face that fact for yourself, right? I mean, you might have studied for, months and months and months, think you have it, you do it a few times, it works, but sometimes it doesn't. Like, there's something wrong there, and it takes a lot of, instead of beating yourself up, just being like, I don't know this yet. And I think that takes a lot of, never mind doing it in public or with other people, but doing it just with yourself, just being like having the humility to say, I don't know is
exactly.
Tough.
It is tough. And it's tough because of the cultural conditioning.
Exactly.
And I want to say too, the majority of the traders are men, right? Yep. And men, you guys have really been sold a bill of goods where culture and our society and women are, it's not like it's our fault because we've been indoctrinated and brainwashed too, but we've all put this expectation of you guys to not be human or fallible and to have it figured out. And so this kind of massive shaming, even around your basic sense of masculinity, is constantly being threatened if you show that you don't have it all figured out.
100%.
That you're somehow not a real man. And it's like, oh my God, talk about being set up to fail.
Yeah.
That kind of methodology.
So I read Daring Greatly a year or two ago by Brene Brown. And that's there's a part in it where a man comes up to her after one of her talks and says something along the lines of you want us to be vulnerable, but you being women won't allow us to. And he's speaking, of course, from his own personal experience and his wife and his daughters or whatever, and the expectations that he is putting on himself from them. And it is in our culture, and that is a big big block in the road if you're not like aware that it's there for you and especially as a man. It's tough to fight against. It's because society there is telling you
totally,
100% of the time that you need to be the tough guy. And
exactly.
I mean, if you watch any sitcom, all of the jokes are about men that are just like them being weak or like gay. And it's like, it doesn't even read funny anymore. Like once you realize how mean it is.
Exactly. And that is kind of like seeping into our water, right? Like that kind of way of, and that's part of why, of course, I'm not saying I'm not enamored with a lot of what Joe Rogan's been able to do and create for himself. But part of what I do feel frustrated, there's a couple of things that frustrate me about Joe Rogan, which I'm not going to get into now.
We could do a whole podcast about that. If you want me to talk about that, I could go for hours.
We could have quite a bit, I'm sure you and I can talk about what might frustrate us about Joe Rogan. But the biggest thing that frustrates me about Joe is that I don't feel yet he has begun to look at this concept of the toxic masculinity. And that is, to me, because the majority of his audience is male. And if you guys haven't listened to it, people that know me sometimes are surprised that I would even listen to Joe Rogan. But the reason I do is because not only because he has so many people listening to him, but because I think it's important to understand what is going on philosophically behind anybody today who has a whole bunch of people who see the world through their lens. It helps us to really open up our own eyes. Yeah. And part of what I feel he himself is a victim of is that toxic masculinity of that, kind of place of not being comfortable with the vulnerability. And he does have a tendency at times to be vulnerable because he's so curious and he is so open to like going down roads that other people perhaps would make fun of him for doing. But I think that concept of toxic masculinity, and I think I've talked about this in one of the podcasts I've recorded, the best movie I can say sums it up better than I can is The Mask You Live In, which is a documentary just about the cultural conditioning of men and boys in particular. Yeah. So the heart of it, I'm not anti-man. I actually am.
Me either.
So I'm glad you're not. I'm glad you're not. I'm totally coming from a place of wanting to give a lot of empathy to men because I feel they're all very much been painted into a corner by the culture and definitely by women's expectations because women have been brainwashed too many times. And I feel like in a lot of ways for guys, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Yeah. And that is between a rock and a hard place. And that's an impossible place to be. But please, if you're trying to understand like the depth of what I'm saying, which I can't capture in a few minutes, we went down a whole rabbit hole.
I know this is
people are going to probably have a lot of comments about, but trust me, I am all about giving them the tools to begin to get comfortable with their humanity and to not subscribe to this cultural indoctrination of, you got to be all that in a bag of chips. And I hope you'll watch The Mask You Live In because it's a sobering movie. It's a hard to watch documentary. But I've also said to the men, I've recommended it probably to every male client I've ever worked with and to the women, because I think women need to see like what I'm not saying women aren't up against shit in this world. We certainly are, but it's not like there isn't a lot of shit to go around for both sides. But at the end of the day, that documentary, I think, is so powerful for some men. My recommendation is that men always watch it by themselves, because I think if they're watching it with a woman or their partner, they may not necessarily let the emotions that get triggered watching that documentary come forward. So give yourself the privacy to watch that documentary and be with all that you may have to reconcile with around. I wouldn't be surprised if some men are going to walk away furious after that documentary over what they have kind of been sold this fake bill of goods.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that was an unexpected development today.
Yeah, right. but that's just another form of like figuring out the competence of, a lot of people don't even believe that masculinity, like toxic masculinity, is a thing. And so you're just living in a state of unconscious incompetence. And so until you are aware of it, and then you see, and then it takes a lot of work to recognize where it plays a role in your life. Just speaking from my own experience. And then it's like, I don't really, like, I'm not passionate about that. I was just doing it because like society was telling me that I needed to do that. And
totally,
it's not serving me. It's not bringing my life value. It's not bringing the people around me value. And so maybe let it go.
Maybe let it go. Yep, for sure. But if you think about the concept of like how many hindrances there are to trading, there's so many hurdles you're going to have to climb over. Don't bring this unexpected expectation, this toxic kind of mindset of thinking that it has to look a certain way because it's just going to potentially get in your way.
Yep.
And you need less in your way because trust me, the market has plenty to put in your way.
There are already so many things to deal with. Don't put more things in your way.
Don't add to the potholes that are ahead of you or the boulders, for sure. So okay, this is what's going to happen, people, in these podcasts on occasion. Similar to Joe Rogan, we're going to go down these little rabbit holes and black holes, and it's just because I have a lot of opinions, just like I said at the beginning, and it's okay to have a lot of opinions. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert in everything that I speak about, because I'm not, but I definitely am somebody who has read a lot of books to at least be able to light the path for myself. And ultimately, all that I'm trying to share with everybody in these conversations are the ones that have worked for me. But at the end of the day, you have to find what works for you. I even say to clients, there are books I recommend to them or documentaries or movies. Not everything's going to land. Not everything's going to speak to you. It's okay. It spoke to me for some reason. Maybe where I was in my life. I have had books where I've read in the past that didn't work, and then I read them 20 years later, and now they land, and vice versa. So find what works for you. This is what's worked for me. These are the aha moments I've developed over time. If they serve you, great. If they don't, put them down, keep looking. But the key is to keep looking so you can get to that place, at least in your own self-development of unconscious competence. And I guess we should close it there.
Yeah, that's perfect. Great closing.
Okay.
All right. Great job. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want us to speak to certain topics, please put them in the comments. And if you like our podcast and you think it's worthy of 5 stars, please do that for us on iTunes, and also we're on Spotify now, I believe, and also on YouTube. Those likes definitely add up in the algorithms of YouTube, so please give us those too. Anything else you want to say?
No, that's it.
Close it up. You. Okay. Aloha, and we say in Hawaii is a hui ho until we meet again. So aloha, everybody, and a hui ho.
This has been the Wall Street Coach Podcast with Kim Ann Curtin. You can find out more about her and her team online at thewallstreetcoach.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.